The Nigerian Senate has raised concerns about the influx of substandard premium motor spirit PMS and automotive gas oil AGO into the market. Senator Asuquo Ekpeyong, representing the Southern Senatorial District of Cross River, highlighted a June 16, 2024 report showing that 12 diesel cargoes totaling 660 kilotons were exported by refineries to offshore Lome, Togo, for distribution to Nigeria. He noted the diesel did not meet Nigerian standards for flash and sulfur levels.
Well, this follows a statement from Divekumar Edwin, Vice President of Oil and Gas at Dangote Industries Limited, criticizing the indiscriminate licensing of marketers who end up bringing dirty fuel into the country. However, the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, NMPCL, countered, stating that high sulfur petroleum products were last imported in February and the issue had been addressed. The Senate has established an ad hoc committee to investigate the report. Well, this morning on Breakfast Central, we are joined by Professor of Climate Science and Environment in River State University, Port Harcourt, with specialization in energy use and, of course, air pollution. Professor Precious Ede, thank you so much for being here this morning on Breakfast Central.
Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Let's take a look at bad fuel. I mean, for as far as we know, we've seen a lot of complaints, especially in the early time of this year, 2024, even 2023. And many have come out to say that it seems like ever since the president made the announcement that fuel subsidy is gone, we've started to see an importation of what we know or call bad fuel. What's the impact of this story, and how do you think it will indeed affect the production of fuel, especially in Nigeria?
Yeah, this story is shocking. It is shocking because we are just about to begin to receive PMS from Dangote Refinery and the Port Harcourt Refinery. Both have been slated to begin production of this fuel. Already Dangote Refinery is producing diesel. So when we hear that bad fuel is about to be imported or have been imported already into the country, it is a shocking news because it means that they will dampen the sustenance of the existing refinery. That is why the Senator Ekpeyong, said yesterday in Senate that Nigeria has the capacity, which is true. It is true because recent events in the last 1 or 2 months have placed us in a position to be able to produce this fuel locally. So the effect will be that this fuel that is imported, which will be cheaper, it will be cheaper because it is poor quality fuel, it is dirty fuel, will now be sold at a lower price. And given how down the Nigerian economy is, people will go for a cheap article without really knowing the impact.
Okay, let's talk about, I mean, you say that it is a surprise, but this is not something that is quite new in Nigeria. We've seen it happen. If we go as far back as Sani Abacha's time in 1997, there was a conversation about the importation of foul smell in 2008. When President Muhammadu Buhari was here, there was importation of bad fuel. At that time, they said the ethanol level was higher than usual. And even as recent as 2022, we also had conversation about methanol being found in our fuel. So we've had incidences, repeat incidences of bad fuel. There would maybe be an investigation. You will see vehicles being damaged. Not much is being done thereafter. So we've seen it happen over and over again. What would you say is the reason why we keep seeing this happen over and over again? Is it that, you know, we're not doing thorough investigation, where the NMPCL is probably not establishing itself as a regulatory body that is doing its job thoroughly? Or would you say it's because there have been no consequences?
There have been no consequences. That is the primary reason. But in terms of the authorities doing their job, in this case for fuel, it is the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. It is their duty to see that they don't license somebody who will bring in fuel, and if somebody does that, that he is sanctioned. But in the past, there have been no sanction. We all remember what happened about 2 or 3 years ago in 2022, January and February, when Nigerian market was flooded with substandard fuel that was imported from Belgium with very high methanol content. And nobody was called, nobody was sanctioned, nobody was punished, nobody was stopped from even further importing fuel. So there is a lapse in the regulatory system of the country. But remember, if you have ever brought something into Nigeria through the ports, it is not just the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Agency that is there. You have all sorts of agencies. You have Standard Organization of Nigeria, you have Custom, you have all of them standing by. Nothing passes without their, peeping into it and ascertaining that this can be allowed into the country. So it is a complete breakdown that, in our surveillance and regulatory system that have led to us suffering periodic import of foul-smelling fuel that is actually dangerous. The smell you hear there is sulfur content. It's high sulfur that causes fuel to have a peculiar odor. And when it is very high, especially with methanol itself also have its own peculiar odor. That's what you smell. And that odor is very, very injurious. It can cause catarrh, it can cause headache, it can trigger asthma, it can knock engines. Car engines. It's not all car engines that are suitable. Look, methanol is added to fuel normally at about 15%, and that is what the regulation says in Nigeria. But the ones that we have on our filling stations that causes problem are usually above that 15%, and they are cheaper. That is why they are brought into the country. And so when you bring in something that is cheaper than the locally produced ones, it means you are driving the price of, you are challenging the local industry not to survive. That's the implication. These people are bringing, that is dumping, they are merely bringing substandard products into the Nigerian environment so that they can make quick profit.
So I want you to talk again about sanctions. On whose table does the burden lie? And I ask this because, we've seen in other countries. I remember some years back when Volkswagen was also implicated for, they had failed their emissions test. And then we saw that whilst they recalled these vehicles, they paid damages. And even to people whose vehicles had been, damaged, they paid a certain sum. So, what sort of damages or what sort of sanctions should be imposed, and who should these sanctions be imposed on? Is it, the people who are the ones? Is it the people who are the ones importing the fuel? What kind of? Are we even considering the people's vehicles who are getting bad, and how can we effect these sanctions?
If a proper investigation is carried out, you will see that somebody approved that this consignment be brought into Nigeria. It couldn't have slipped into Nigeria without the knowledge of certain authorities. So who are those people? The Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. There is an individual or a set of individuals there who are given approval. They should be held responsible. Secondly, how about custom? How about Standard Organization of Nigeria? All those people who are assigned to monitor that things do not come into Nigeria, that shouldn't come into Nigeria, should be sanctioned. Then, secondly, even when you bring something in, whether fuel or any other product, it is supposed to be certified that it meets local standard. So those people too who are supposed to do that should be sanctioned. So we are talking about an economic crime here. We're talking about an economic crime. We're talking about a crime against the people of Nigeria. And the various authorities that normally, like EFCC, that normally to look into such crime, should swing into action. But because they have not done it in the past, it is difficult to see whether there will be a change this time around. At least we should be learning, we should be growing from what we used to be to another level, so that things do not always repeat themselves, especially negative things.
All right, I want us to also look at the call that has been made by Dangote. In the past few weeks, apart from what took place 2 days ago, where he talked to the CBN about the 30% interest rate, which indeed will cripple businesses and will not help the economy grow. And we're certain that that also was what he said concerning his own business. But then let's also look at another conversation where he did talk about marketers who are looking to boycott the products that will be coming from his refinery. Many have said that there seems to be some form of power play here in the Nigerian oil and gas sector. We've clamored, we've craved, we've prayed for us to have our own indigenous oil refinery. And here we have one, but yet it seems like it's not yet uhuru for even Dangote himself. Do you have any thoughts on what really is going on between the marketers, between the refinery itself, where Dangote is talking and speaking out loud, and then what's going on with how the impact will affect Nigeria and the economy as well?
Yeah, it is true that there are entrenched interests in the importation of fuel, in the continued importation of fuel, which amounts to about $10 billion annually and several trillions of naira. People are benefiting from it. A lot of kickbacks, in fact, that some of the fuel cargoes that are paid for by Nigeria never even enter Nigeria. It's a common knowledge. It is out there in the public domain. It has been discussed at the highest level by several well-meaning Nigerians, in the highest level of government, that some claims that are made against the government of Nigeria for the importation of fuel is not true. So these interests, who have benefited billions of dollars, or who are still benefiting from billions of dollars, will not hold their hands. You see, people make allegations. When they make allegations and the authorities that should look into those allegations do not take steps to punish those identified, they continue to perpetrate those crimes and continue to run the economy down through what they are doing. So, because you have this thing, and it has been going on for years, for over 30 years, Nigeria have been importing fuel. Even when the local refineries were working, because they were always operating at below capacity, we always had to import fuel to augment. But in the last 5 or 6 years, we import 100% diesel and diesel, kerosene, and PMS into the country. So the people now have a very large pie that they sit on, and they wouldn't like anybody to dislodge them. But that is why we have the Nigerian state with all the apparatus, whether security, regulatory agencies, and the commissions, to prosecute and identify and prosecute all those who are committing this economic sabotage. But in our own case, we can't point to anybody who have been successfully dealt with as a result of this crime. And I consider it a very, very disservice to the country.
I mean, it's unfortunate. Maybe if we had seen a number of people fired, losing their jobs, and the government taking a very strong stand, we probably wouldn't have been going over this over and over again. So yes, like you said earlier, it's a lack of sanctions that is the challenge. There was a report in 2020 by Stakeholder Democracy Network, and in that report, they said that the fuel that is being processed by local illegal refiners is a lot purer than what is being imported. So is it maybe time to then bring in these illegal refineries into the conversation and see how we can maximize local refineries? What's your thought on that?
I'm smiling because I have done extensive study of artisanal refinery in Rivers State and the Niger Delta as a whole. I have some publications on that. And I will not agree totally with any person who claims that the artisanal refineries produce better fuel than proper refineries. It is not true. But even among established refineries, whether Nigeria or overseas, and among artisanal refineries, they have grades of fuel. For instance, if you come to the Port Harcourt environment where I live, they have a grade of diesel called Lacasera. Let me tell you, if not for the effort of those artisanal refineries, individuals, establishment, and the Nigerian society as a whole will grind to a halt for those who need diesel to power whatever activities they are engaged in. We all know that the main public power supply does not function well in Nigeria. So everybody has to augment with some form of self-generating system, diesel being one of the most important, especially for serious heavy-duty power generation. So I want to tell you that the market today in Nigeria is served extensively by products of artisanal refinery. But these artisanal refiners do not have standard. So when you get their product, which I have seen, it contains a lot of impurities, so you have to do filtration yourself. Some of the qualities they introduce into the market could be very, very dangerous. Some look very murky and are not transparent. But there are also a few, and they too, because they sell different grades, they also sell at different prices to consumers. There are products today, even by an international organization, a news organization based in the Middle East, which I wouldn't like to name, have been shown to be powering economies across Nigeria and West Africa. Their reach is very, very far because they also produce a lot.
There's a lot to talk about. But my final question to you would be, Dangote Refinery will go into the market in another 10 to 15 days' time. Are we expecting to see a reduction in the cost of premium motor spirit when it does go into the market? We know we saw it leap from 200 naira from the Buhari regime up until 600. And now we hear that some parts of the north are even paying 1,000 naira for fuel per litre. When it eventually gets into the market, should we expect to see maybe a reduction in the cost price?
Yes, there is a school of thought that says Dangote should produce his fuel and introduce it into the market. Individuals should be allowed to bring in their own fuel and also introduce it into the market. But let's regulators make sure that whether it is Dangote or imported, that they meet local standards for whether diesel or premium motor spirit. Let competition determine the market price. In an ideal situation, that is what should be. But what we have in Nigeria is that somebody can bring in a substandard fuel, bribe his way through the entry ports and circulate it in Nigeria, and the consumer who don't have sufficient knowledge will buy it, or who don't have much choice will buy it, and it will begin to cause health problems or problems to the engine of his vehicle. So when you say whether the onset of the beginning of production, because in the news they've said even Port Harcourt Refinery is also poised to produce very soon, or is about to, and then Dangote, So when you say whether their own product will reduce prices, from a pure macroeconomic point of view, yes, it will reduce prices because they are producing locally, they are sourcing their materials locally, they are paying salaries locally. So the prices should be less than that of any person who brings a product from outside Nigeria. But it is, in the way things happen in Nigeria, nothing is transparent. We don't have a clear-cut idea because you remember that for most of this year, Dangote have been importing fuel from America. So he cannot import, he has been importing crude oil from America. So he cannot import crude oil from America because he cannot get local supply. And you expect him to sell very cheaply and drive prices down. So all these things are very dynamic and dicey. And that is why we need to stamp our feet. Those in a position to regulate things should stamp their feet and see that the right things are done, that everybody does what he's supposed to do. Every player is given his role so that when we get these local refineries running, their prices will actually make nobody be interested in importing fuel. But for now, we are not there because even Dangote himself has come publicly to say that he's been sabotaged and that if he knew that this is how tough this business would be, he wouldn't have engaged in it.
All right. Let's talk about the role that the NMPCL has to play in all of this, especially because we've had conversations with some of the marketers, and some of them will still insist that the NMPC is still the sole importer of fuel. So talk to us about the role of the NMPC in all of this on the one hand. And on the other hand, let's talk about what the next steps are. So let's say the investigation is carried out and they find out that maybe of the truth, there's actually contaminated fuel, bad fuel. What next?
It's okay. I hope that truly, like you said, the investigation is going on because it's not even the business of the National Assembly. Somebody has gone to a member of the National Assembly have raised the alarm. So we were expecting that the right authorities who have the capacity to make the investigations should swing into action. But unfortunately, it also falls on to those people who allowed the fuel in, the dirty fuel in the first place. So as for going forward, my call is simple. Why is it that every day, if you come to the Niger Delta, you will hear that 1,000 artisanal refinery sites have been closed down, bombed from the air, and they are no more functioning. Of course, they will spring up again when the people who bombed it go back to their base. But why is it that for something that is so nationally obvious, like the importation of dirty fuel, we are making it look mysterious, as if it didn't pass through a particular point in our borders, and that there are no people at those borders whose job it was to look at this product and approve their entry into the distance. So we know exactly whom to hold on matters like this. And either people wake up, do what is expected of them, or they should leave that position, or they should be compelled to leave that position so that we can have some sense of sanity, at least in some sectors of the national economy.
And the NMPC?
The NMPC, well, the NMPC in theory is the sole importer of petroleum. But let's remember that the NMPC is not the same as the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority. They are completely independent. In fact, by the Petroleum Industry Act, the NMPC is now a limited liability company and should be treated like any other Nigerian limited public limited liability company. But the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority are the ones that should really look into what the NMPC or any other person that NMPC gives license on his behalf to import the fuel is doing. So the NMPC itself, as a company that is owned by Nigeria as a nation, should also know that they owe Nigeria a lot of responsibility, who are their shareholders, to see that they do not engage in activities that sabotage the welfare of the country.
All right. I want to say thank you so much for talking to us, Professor of Climate Science and Environment in Rivers State University, Port Harcourt. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much
for joining us this morning.